Hi everyone, welcome back to the C# Basic series, and today we're going to be talking about inheritance. Inheritance is one of the key things of object-oriented programming, which is sort of philosophy of how your code should be structured and a way to keep it sort of clean. It's pretty much universally used in programming, and it's really like one of the cornerstones. So inheritance is basically just going to allow us to take bits from one class and use it in another. So I went ahead and deleted the other file that we were using. I'm just going to try and do everything in here. So I'm going to create a new class. It's called Asset. Create a curly braces. I'm also going to make this class public. I'm going to say Asset has a public string and then name. So for this class, I'm going to say public class. We'll just say bank account. And we're going to want to, after the class name, but before the curly braces, have a colon, and then say asset. And then we're going to create a new public double, and then this is going to be our account balance. Go ahead and save that, and then up here in the hello world class, we can say we want to create a new bank account. Say account equals new bank account, and then we can have curly braces and directly target these fields. So we'll say the account balance equals 1000.00, comma, and then the name equals Chase. And then we have the semicolon on the outside of the curly braces. So the cool thing you can see here is that we have the account balance, which we said was a part of bank account, but then since we're inheriting from asset, we're also getting the name field as well. So this way, if something's an asset, so a bank account can be an asset, right? But then you can also have stocks, and that's an asset as well. So if we did the same exact thing, public int, well actually we'll make this double technically, shares owned. Right, so this way, instead of having name in both of these classes, we can inherit and reduce the amount of code that we actually have. And the thing about inheritance is that asset doesn't know that it's being inherited, but bank account knows that it's inheriting from asset, obviously, as we can see, since we're setting the name directly. Just an important thing to keep in mind. So what I was just talking about with asset not knowing that's being inherited is another object-oriented programming, which I'll refer to as OOP from now on, or OOP. That is another cornerstone of object-oriented programming. So if we were to create a new method, and say public static void, and then we're going to say that this method will print the name. So we're going to pass in an account, or an asset rather. Let's say our asset. So if we were to do since we're importing the system.console, we don't have to use console, so we can just say write line and then print out asset.name. So with this, we could use print name and then pass in our account, and then I'm going to do a read key here just so that way we can see the results. So if I were to print this out, can see that it prints out the name, and this works because bank account is technically an asset. Bank account will have everything that asset has, but it's not the other way around. So if we were to say that we're going to pass in a new bank account, let's say BA, right? And we say BA.account balance. And then instead of using account, we say a new asset. This is invalid, and we're getting red squigglies because it's saying that it can't convert from asset to bank account, and that is because asset is always going to have less fields than bank account has. So bank account is an asset, but asset is not a bank account. Asset is not a stock. So that is the polymorphism. Said Morpheus. That is polymorphism. In a nutshell, basically. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and delete print name. We don't need it right now. So Another thing we can do is cast classes into a different type of class. So just to say an asset equals account. So we're saying that the asset now equals bank account. So before, we could do account balance. And we can set that equal to a new variable. You know, like, we have access to this. But if we were to do this, which is called an Upcast Conversion, if we try to do that again and do asset dot account balance, you can see that we're getting no code hints here. Also, I spelled this wrong. But basically, we're not able to access this anymore. So when we convert this account class into a new asset, we're losing all access to fields in here. We're turning bank account into just the asset, so we'll only have access to what asset has. But we can do this where we say we get the name. Now, of course, we're assigning that to a double, so it doesn't make sense, but there we go. So we still have access to the name, but we no longer have access to account balance. That's called an Upcast Conversion. And then we can also do a Downcast Conversion. So if we create a new bank account, I'll just, if I can spell, name this account too, and then say this is equal to asset. And so since this isn't legal implicitly, we're going to have to cast this into a bank account, and then everything is fine. So the reason we have to do this implicit conversion is because this may not always work, and if we were to do something like try to convert this into a stocks class, we don't get any errors, but if we were to do this during runtime, it catches an error that we're doing an invalid cast exception. So instead of doing this downcast conversion, which could potentially cause problems, we can actually use a different keyword. So I'm going to go ahead and just comment this out because it'll still throw errors. And if I want to create a new stocks object, stock, and then say asset as stocks, what this will do is that when we want to convert the asset into a stock, it'll turn all our variables into null instead of throwing an exception. So typically it looks like you'll use this if you were to say like if stock dot shares owned equals null, and then you have some logic in here, right? And you do that. You would rather want to use the first one that we tried before and it threw the invalid cast exception, because it gives us that exception and you can put this within a try catch block. So, you know, we can use try, put this in here, say catch invalid cast exception, and then do a right line, error thrown. Right, so this is just better technique because you're catching the error and you'll have logic that will actually deal with it. So you can see that we get an error thrown when we try to do this, and that's more helpful than just checking if the fields are null, but it is just another way to do it. I'm going to go clean up this code a little bit, and we'll probably need the read key for later, so I'll keep that down here. Tucked away. So there's another reserved keyword that I haven't really mentioned yet because I didn't know what it was, but we can actually create methods, fields, properties, all the stuff that is called a virtual method. So for this we would say public virtual, and then the book uses the example of liability, and we have to specify that this is going to be a double, say 0.0. So basically what virtual means is that we can override this property in this case. So in a bank account, we could say that, say public override double liability. And then this is just saying get the base class, which is asset, and then get that liability. So this is just keeping the same thing. You don't need this line of code. But if you wanted to change what the liability was, we can just set this equal to account balance. So by default, and still in stocks, the liability is set to 0.0. But in bank account, we override this and say that's equal to the account balance. So I'm going to go ahead and clean this up a little bit. We're going to remove liability. So I'm going to add a new keyword for this class, and it's called abstract. And so what abstract means is that we cannot create a new asset class. It is going to be illegal to do this. And you can see that we're getting an error here. So abstract means that it's going to be like a template for other classes that inherit from it. They're going to have to implement the things that are inside of here, but you cannot create an asset itself. An asset by itself doesn't exist. An asset is just going to have some boilerplate code that other classes that inherit from it will need to have themselves. So another thing that we can do is say that a method is going to be sealed. A method, property field, basically everything, and we're actually going to create a new property, but we're going to say liability is going to be equal to account balance. And we have to set this equal to a double. And so we're getting an error here that it can't be sealed because it is not an override, so we have to start up here, say this is a public virtual double liability, and say that's equal to 0.0. And so after we create that virtual method, we have to come down here and say override again. It's a very verbose way, but this means that if another class were to inherit from bank account, it could not change liability at all. So if we were to say that, the liability for a bank account will always be the account balance, and we don't want another class to change that, that's how we do it. We do a sealed override. So we have all this stuff, and let's look at how constructors come in the mix here. So if we were to create a new asset constructor, we're going to say that people can pass in a name in. We'll also say that this constructor is public as well. And so what I'm going to do is set this equal to an empty string just by default, but people can pass in things. So we'll say name equals name in. And so if we want to create a new bank account, right, you would think that we'd be able to do this, where we could delete this and then pass in new name, right? But bank account doesn't automatically inherit the constructor, and it has to define it. So right now bank account has no constructor that we can use. So we have to actually go ahead and define that as well. So we'll say public bank account. But the cool thing is that we'll have another string name in. It's going to inherit from the base, which is always going to be the class that inherits from. Then we're going to pass in name in. And we'll have our curly braces right here. And boom. If we go back up to the code, it works now. So again, just like we're inheriting the asset class, we're using the colon to inherit the base constructor, and we're just passing in name in. And so that is it for inheritance. Thanks for watching.